Good afternoon, and thank you, Campbell. Let's give Campbell a great hand. She is doing a fabulous job. Again, I'm Kathy Hubbard. I'm from Indianapolis in Indiana, and I'm proud to serve on the board of the American Federation for Children, one of the hosts of today's events. We're dedicated to breaking down barriers to allow every child to reach their full potential by attending the school of their parents' choice. I have the honor to introduce to you our next panel, From DC to Your State, Empowering Parents and Reforming Education. First, please welcome Allysia Finley, the editorial writer from the Wall Street Journal. Allysia has appeared on Fox News and Fox Business News and has written feature pieces for the Wall Street Journal's op-ed page. Welcome, Allysia. Then please welcome my representative from the state of Indiana, Luke Messer. Congressman Messer is the chairman of the House Republican Policy Committee, founder of the Congressional School Choice Caucus, a former state legislator, and the former president of School Choice Indiana. Welcome, Congressman Messer. Finally, please welcome our moderator, Gerard Robinson. Gerard is an education fellow for the American Enterprise Institute, a longtime advocate for parental choice and education reform, and formerly served as the Commissioner of Education in Florida, Secretary of Education in Virginia, and also as the president of the Black Alliance of Educational Options. Welcome, Gerard. Have a great panel.
I can't think of any better place to have a conversation about education than a school, so I want to thank everyone who's here. We've heard some great comments about education, and we now have an opportunity to listen to two very important opinion leaders. One is in Congress, and one works for the Wall Street Journal. So let's just dive into the issue. There's a lot of conversation currently about the role of the federal government in education. Education Next just recently published a report giving an idea where the public stands. You as a lawmaker in Congress, what do you think is the appropriate role of federal government in education?
Well, our schools and our families are obviously the backbone of America. And from my party, I'm a Republican. The mantra of the last 20 years when asked that question has essentially been, well, if we just would abolish the Department of Education, then we would bring all these answers back to the local level and solve the problem. Now, listen, I've read the Constitution. It doesn't say anything in there about the Federal Department of Education. We've spent 400 times more money over the last 20 or 30 some years since the Department of Education was founded. But when we say that, it sounds to moms and dads like we don't care about their education. I think what we need to do is make sure that we fulfill the promise of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which says we're all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In modern America, if that opportunity to succeed is going to mean something, you got to have access to a quality education. And what I'd like to see the federal government do is take the money we do spend and put it in the hands of parents so that they can be the decision maker that drives opportunity for their child.
You've seen education in different levels. What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, it should get out of the way of reform. In many cases, as you've seen in Louisiana, where the Justice Department basically prosecuted Louisiana's voucher system for violating equal protection and essentially accused them of segregation. First of all, you should not be trying to squash reform. And I think there's also a role to be played in encouraging accountability through just, what they call sunshine, requiring that states post the results of their standardized tests so you can see the income or the gap in terms of achievement gap between the blacks, whites, and different income levels. This has really played an important role in reforms at the state level, where you see that it's a lot of governors and state legislatures have touted or flogged these results and to say, this is why we need to reform, because our students are not performing as well as you think they are. These schools are really struggling.
You mentioned testing, and that's an interesting way to segue. You know a lot about testing. You've seen it at the state level in Indiana and in Congress. A lot of polls say that's probably something we should let the states do. Where do you fall on this issue?
Well, the House version of the K through 12 Authorization Act would essentially keep accountability but allow that accountability to be driven at a state level, to make sure we're still measuring, as some of the speakers earlier today have said. If you don't measure, it's hard to know what the results are. It's frankly hard for parents to make good decisions for their kids as well. So we need to have that accountability, but it ought to be driven at the local level. I think, you're kind of molding into your earlier question as well. This forum today is an incredible statement. I mean, the fact that you've got 6 or 7 presidential candidates coming in here today to talk about the importance of education is a sea change from even 4 or 8 years ago. And I think it's being driven by the consumer, by parents that know that they want to have better opportunities for their kids.
You brought up a very interesting point about parents and tests. One of the concerns about those who say we shouldn't advance choice, frankly, the parents aren't sophisticated enough to understand how to navigate choice or to understand a good school from a bad school. You're saying that tests actually is a step in the right direction. How would you answer that question for parents who say, yeah, I think tests matter, but I want to be assured that the schools are also doing what they need to do?
Well, I think, first of all, tests do matter. And the federal government, I think they mandate around 17 tests at this point. And states add on a bunch of other tests. To ensure that parents need to know how their kids are doing. Many don't. And schools do not have any incentive to do a better job because they're getting the money either way. And why would they tell a student or a parent, we're really not we're not educating your kid, we're not preparing them for college just because he's passing these tests and getting B's and A's. There is this thing called grade inflation. It occurs in wealthy white areas and poor black areas. It occurs everywhere, in which everyone has an incentive to cover up the problems, and not unless you actually require some kind of minimum level of testing and posting those and showing the achievement gap, disaggregated data, it will persist.
Absolutely. It's interesting when we talk about tests, we often focus on the role of the state and forget that local superintendents and school boards can actually vote to approve tests beyond the state. So that's a good point to add. Congressman, you just mentioned briefly about ESEA. We know that President Johnson modernized the Department of Education, and particularly the role that the federal government plays in K-12 education. Tell us where we are with ESEA and where you think we'll be soon.
Well, you actually have 2 bills, a bill that passed the House and a bill that passed the Senate. It would be time for conference. The Senate version of the bill necessarily was a bipartisan measure, because in the Senate, you're not going to get a bill up to a vote unless 60 members of the Senate vote for it. I think there's probably not been a bigger punching bag in the last 20 years than the No Child Left Behind legislation. We all know many of the challenges that it's had. It's not all that popular, but I do think it's important to remember that some of the basic principles in that bill, the fact that we'd have accountability, the fact that we would try as a nation to make sure that every kid in America had an opportunity to succeed, is important to preserve. So what we've done with the House version of the bill, I'm on the House Education Committee, is we've tried to maintain accountability, but allow that accountability to be driven through testing at more of a state level. We've done away with the highly qualified teacher standards, which, we all want to make sure kids have highly qualified teachers, but the federal government standards have been some of the most unpopular regulations in education in a very long time. We maintained that, but we allow states to develop, and local school boards to develop methods of testing and making sure that teachers are performing. We try to grow educational opportunities by encouraging charter schools, encouraging greater use of magnet schools. I would like to see a far more robust effort towards school choice to make sure every family, listen, we've had long in America school choice if you can afford it. If you can afford to send your kid to a better school, you do. You either move or you pay for it. The real question is, what are we going to do as a country for those who can't afford it? But to make that happen, to make that work, you have to have accountability as well, because if parents are going to choose, they have to be able to know which schools are doing better, and some of that comes through testing. So those are some of the innovations. You know, as far as the prediction of what will happen with the bill, I think you're going to see a bill pass this year. I think you'll see a bipartisan compromise on a bill. It may not be the bill I would have written, but I think it's a bill that will be far better than current federal law and gets us moving in a better direction.
You write a lot about education, not in Congress, but yet you get a chance to influence how people think about it. What would you say to lawmakers to actually strengthen the law that we currently have, or to give the new president who will come in, to give him or her a clean slate to start with? What would you recommend?
Well, I think one thing that has been on the wish list of a lot of reformers and school choice proponents is to allow portability of Title I funds, which the Obama administration has come out very vehemently against because they think it would hurt schools who have kids who would want to use these funds. I mean, usually it's around $1,000 per student or something like that. But these could be used as vouchers or voucher supplements in many states to go to a private school. And this would really help a lot of kids to achieve other opportunities that are not provided or accessible to them right now. So I think that would be on the top of the wish list.
Okay. Portability, in fact, was debated pretty heavily.
Yeah, I mean, the version of the K-12 authorization that passed the House includes portability of Title I within the public school setting. So it includes that for charter schools and includes it for magnet schools. I believe it would be a major breakthrough if we could get that passed as soon as even 2017. I'm not going to tell you that I think we're going to get Title I portability with this president and the current head of the Department of Education, but it's $14.5 billion. Depending on the state and the local community, it could be as much as $1,000 or even $2,500 or $3,000 per child. I think it's important. You know, the history of the school choice movement over the last couple decades has been a history of going to a state, planting a flag, and then working that debate. It's in no state I'm aware of has it been an easy debate. It's taken a while to persuade folks that that's the right policy. But I'll tell you, once those policies have come to a state, be it states that have charter schools, states that have broader choice programs, the champions of the program become the people served by the program.
Correct.
I mean, I've seen this in Indiana, in my home state, when I was a state legislator. When we would have a rally of thousands come to the General Assembly, they didn't look like folks that work at your typical think tank. I mean, it was a mosaic of the state of Indiana, folks of all colors, races, and creeds that were, for the first time in their lives, seeing opportunities for their kids that they've not had. I had an opportunity to go to a charter school in DC called Basis. It's an amazing school where they have a high math and science curriculum where they're teaching physics concepts to kids in elementary school. And afterwards, we talked to these young people that were working at the school and asked them, they were asking questions, and you can learn a lot from what a kid knows, not just by what the answers they tell you, but the questions they ask, right? Correct. So if they ask tough questions, you learn that they're in a rigorous curriculum. Well, anyway, the question these young people ask me is, what are you going to do to make sure that my friends and neighbors and cousins are going to have the same kind of opportunity I have?
Correct.
So these kids in some of the world-class education, they're worried about the folks that live next to them that they know aren't having an opportunity to go into the same kind of school. And I think that's why we have this amazing opportunity, this forum, the debate over the next several years. It's driven by parents.
Sure.
Who want to make sure that their kids have an opportunity. And you know what, as I said earlier, in America we say, sorry for pounding my microphone, but in America we say that you've got a God-given right to that opportunity, and yet we fall short in providing it. And I think the choice movement, school choice movement, is an important part of fulfilling that promise.
Both of you have hit really good points related to accountability and testing. I know all of us who support choice are also interested in making sure that students are prepared for careers, but also for college. Higher education is also important in this conversation. We also know that the Higher Education Act also turned 50 this year as well. Talk to me a little bit, and we'll start with you, about higher education. Where should we go? How should we really make that work? We've got issues of affordability, $1.2 trillion in debt. What do you think?
Well, I think the focus has been a little bit too much on how much the federal government spends or I think the focus has been too much on affordability insofar that what is shown, and I think there was just a Federal Reserve study, New York Federal Reserve, that shows that one of the primary drivers of tuition costs and higher education costs has been the subsidies. And that schools basically just take these subsidies, the Pell Grants, the student loans, federal student loans, which are typically below market interest rates offered, and they just take them and they just ratchet up tuition even more for all students. And that's actually has been a disservice to students in increasing the debt. In terms of higher education, I think well, there's this gainful employment rule that many of you may have heard about that just clamps down on for-profit schools under the guise of providing accountability. I think it's an income to debt ratio, and if a program does not meet the student's income to debt overall ratio, it's closed down. And it is, I believe, it's supposed to be affected in nearly 1 million students. So about 1 million students will be thrown out of their schools or programs right now. I mean, accountability is great, but I think you need to, if you're going to do this, you need to apply this to all programs, not just for-profits. You need to apply it to nonprofits and public colleges as well. That will never happen because it would affect too many students. And the truth is that many of these programs are really helping, notwithstanding what the token, whatever debt levels and income levels, they're really helping low income and minority kids to get a different kind of education, more flexible education, vocational training that they can't get anywhere else. And the reason why the quote unquote debt levels are so high and income levels is because they're poor, they're lower income, they have to take out more debt. And their incomes immediately upon graduation aren't going to be that high because in those professions, nursing, many of these professions, public professions, do not pay that well, but they have great potential over a lifetime.
Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the federal higher education programs are some of the most successful federal programs in the history of the federal government. What do I mean by that? If you look at our federal education programs, they've been focused over the last 4 decades plus, 5 decades, on increasing access to our system. And by that measure, we've had far greater access to our higher education system than we did when, you know, the era of the GI Bill and others first came. The challenge, though, is that life has changed a lot over the last 40 or 50 years, and our higher education programs haven't changed all that much. What do I mean by that? You know, 40 or 50 years ago, if you had some college, you were going to be better off economically. Actuarially, it was measurable that if you had a semester of college, even if you didn't make it through, you'd be more likely to be hired, you'd have higher paying jobs, you would have opportunities. And so in that era, it made a lot of sense to have programs only focused on access. What's changed since then in today's world is, as she described, if you leave college, if you don't graduate from college with a degree in a skill that adds value in the economy, you've got tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and you're no better off economically. And if you happen to have dropped out of school, you might have tens of thousands of dollars of debt and not even have a degree. And so we've now got to bring accountability to this system. And I think it ought to be brought in a way that applies to everybody. I mean, I don't see any reason to treat for-profit institutions any different than we would treat not-for-profits or state land-grant colleges. They all have self-interest. And I think we got to be careful as we work through those measurements that we measure the right things. Anyway, these I think is, you know, some of the great opportunities we have in the next couple of years.
And there are even some examples of innovative for-profit higher education models like Patton University in Oakland, California is doing some great things. So we've looked at the federal level. Let's walk to the state where all the fun stuff takes place. You just happened to mention something about dropouts. When you were a state leader, you actually introduced legislation and became a model on dropouts. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's to me one of the most exciting achievements of my young political career was the opportunity to work in Indiana on passing one of the most innovative dropout prevention programs in the country. The key thing we did was adopt those standards that started to measure accurately. So many in this room will remember, but for decades as a country, to count as a dropout, you had to show up in your senior year and drop out in your senior year. By that measure, almost every school in America had 80+% graduation rates. If instead you looked at the freshman year and traced that student through their senior year, if you couldn't identify that they transferred, when you made that change, you were able to see that across the country it's a 70% graduation rate, in some schools in America as low as 20% graduation. I started pushing an agenda that included changing the dropout age in Indiana to 18. It'd been 16 for decades. And it also included a whole host of other innovative programs, but greater use of the community college program and the right. Well, anyway, as we started to pass that program, a lot of folks said, well, you don't understand. There's some bad apples, there's some bad eggs out there, some kids that are just hard to deal with. Some kids move, right? Well, I can tell you when we started measuring accurately, there wasn't any school in the state of Indiana that had a 103% graduation rate, right? There wasn't any school that had more kids in their senior class than they had in their freshman class. And when schools started to see that, it wasn't 70 or 80% of the kids graduating, that instead in some schools it was 25 or 30, nobody would credibly argue that 2/3 or 3/4 of the kids are bad apples and bad eggs that can't be reached.
Sure.
And so once we were able to establish those changes now we measured, what we've seen in Indiana has been really a remarkable change. Before we went to the 18-year-old dropout age, our graduation rates were in the 30s nationally. They were low 70s. So they were the 30th some states, and they were better than us, and we were in the low 70s. Today in Indiana, it's 89% as our statewide graduation rate. We've now moved into the top 10, and it's been a whole host of work from teachers and principals and parents. It's not some legislation we passed, but I'll tell you, the ubiquitous change we made was dealing with those kids. And what you'll hear anecdotally is that when the kid shows up in their senior year, they go ahead and stay,
So you've had the unique professional and personal opportunity, grew up in California, so we're two California people on stage. You now work in New York, you cover everything in between. You know and have seen a great deal about state level work in public policy. Where should we be going?
Well, I'm actually really excited about what I'm seeing in some areas of California where when I was little, I went to Catholic school through 2nd grade, and my parents had 4 kids, and we couldn't afford it. And this was right around the time when 1992, I believe, when there was the big voucher for Fluffle, and there was a ballot initiative to provide vouchers, and it lost. My parents were huge supporters because that was the only way they were going to be able to continue to send us to Catholic schools just because of the cost. We were fortunate at the time we moved into a different district, school district, a better school district. The one we were in at that point was one of the worst school districts in the state, actually, if you can believe it. And because of that, I was able to get a good education and probably be here today, otherwise I wouldn't. And what's nice or what's exciting about what's happening in California, you rarely hear about anything exciting happening in California outside of Silicon Valley, but is this ground movement, grassroots, in terms of this innovative parent trigger law, which allows 50% or more of parents of any school to take it over and convert it into a charter school or fire the principal and actually achieve some kind of change. You also have this vast expansion of charter schools going on in Los Angeles that's really helping these low-income kids, and you're seeing vast improvements. I think Stanford's Credo Institute has done studies about that, and just huge learning gains, where even though you don't have vouchers nowadays, parents are starting to have some options, and this parent trigger law that started in California is starting to spread to other areas. I think Governor Kasich mentioned it earlier, and you're also seeing this lawsuit the Vergara lawsuit, its name, where you have parents challenging the state's tenure laws and seniority and last in, first out policies of seniority for teachers based on equal protection, because they're finding that all these policies are hurting low-income students more than higher income students, or white students, or black students more than white students. And you're getting these lawsuits based upon these disaggregated testing results to show that this is having a disparate impact on low-income kids. It's essentially a civil rights violation. And they got a victory in this case on a lower level last year. And so you could potentially, in California, I know there's another lawsuit in New York, similar lawsuit. You could potentially overturn these laws, and you could potentially go state by state and overturn, even where you can't have where the legislature won't change, you could potentially overturn these very damaging laws, very unfair laws through grassroots lawsuits.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in Indiana, we've had a very aggressive program led by Governor Mitch Daniels, now continued by Governor Pence. Tony Bennett, who was a superintendent in my home state, was a great leader. And as we've brought in options, parents have shown what the true demand of the program is. I sometimes have folks say, well, if you bring in those choices, well, you're going to end up wrecking our school. And I often say, well, listen, it could either be true that you're doing a great job, and if a new competitor comes in, they're going to have a really hard time because people are happy where they are and they aren't going to want to leave. Or it may be true that people are unhappy where they are in your school system, and if you bring in more choices, they are going to leave. But those two things can't both be true. You can't both be doing a great job, and if you get additional choice and opportunity, somehow it's going to end up destroying your school. And what you've seen in Indiana over the course of the last 5 years is exactly that, is that in lots of school systems where folks are happy with their existing performance and they feel like they're well served, these options have had very little impact on the local school. But where you've had challenges and problems in the existing public school, parents and students are voting with their feet. In Indiana, you have over 30,000 students now who are accessing a voucher program that gives you the opportunity to go to a school that parents wouldn't otherwise have been able to afford. And those programs are means tested. 35,000 kids in charter schools in Indiana. But one of the most exciting programs has been our public school choice program. So one of the things Governor Daniels implemented was a program that essentially said that you are able to go to any school in the state of Indiana, and the dollars that would be attributed to you as a student will follow you to that school system. You know what happened when they opened up our public schools to that kind of choice? You started seeing billboards from public schools advertising in the neighboring community, saying, hey, come here, if you want a physics class. We have physics in our school. Your local school doesn't. And those programs have been accessed even more than the charter and public school program. I think at the end of the day, it's really this simple. If you trust parents, I think parents have their child's best interest at heart. And when given choices, you get better outcomes for kids.
Allysia reminded me, so 1992, I'm in Los Angeles as a fifth grade school teacher. I remember a gentleman coming to our school to have parents sign a petition to actually have the ballot initiative go before the voters, soundly defeated 70-30, and that was in 1993. California was also the second state in the nation to have for charter schools. So since we're on the public and the private charter school, or public and private choice discussion, one of the things you hear all the time, and AFC has done a tremendous job with research and with advocacy, if you allow private choice to come in, you're going to destroy public education as we know it.
I mean, I think, first of all, that hasn't been seen. I mean, first of all, you haven't seen a universal voucher program, I think, anywhere. I mean, still aside from Nevada, which is just starting theirs, with these very, very innovative education savings accounts that allow parents, give them the per pupil stipend to go and spend on anything from homeschooling, textbooks, tutoring, to private school education. But everywhere else you have, they've been fairly limited and caged in by income limits, so you don't really have complete choice anywhere. But even where you do, you have parents, some of them do prefer to stay in their neighborhood schools. And what often happens, there have been studies show in Florida, for instance, that public schools actually improve from the competition. That all of a sudden there's another option, and if they want to keep the money flowing, because schools receive money per pupil from the states, they're going to have to start competing for that money, and they're going to have to start improving, and you actually see some kind of changes being made. And I think you see that in DC as well. DC has improved also because they've had all kinds of tenure reforms, merit pay. But what you also see is in these like DC, where you get vouchers, that lays the groundwork to push for other kinds of reforms, because that is one of the hardest education reforms to get is vouchers. And once you get past that, you can probably do almost anything.
Yeah. I mean, again, she's right. I mean, the studies show that actually the public schools improve in the areas where you have those kinds of choice options, and it's because of what we see everywhere else in life. When you compete, we all tend to get better. I do think lost in all this, and I want to make sure I get this said in the midst of this panel discussion, as I've heard others talk today as well, is as we talk about the need for reform, and as we talk about the need to make sure that every kid in America has a chance to go to a great school, I think we've also need to acknowledge that teachers are caught up in a broken system that makes it very hard for them to do their jobs. I've got a sister-in-law who's a 5th grade teacher, and I love her, and she loves kids, and as we're having these conversations about the need to drive reform, I think we've also got to make sure that we make the point that teachers have a hard job, and I'm pro-parent, and I'm pro-student, and I'm pro-teacher too.
Absolutely. So we've mentioned vouchers. That's one part of the private sector reform effort. There's been a lot of growth in tax credit programs in different states. A lot of people are excited about it. When you look at polling numbers, there are a lot of people who support it, particularly if it's open across the line. There's some who also means test. Do you think the tax credits will be another wave of private school choice? And if so, how do you think that's going to help even with achievement?
I think definitely. I mean, I would consider tax credits in a way under the complete umbrella of voucher systems. Florida went that way after their vouchers were actually struck down by the state Supreme Court, and ironically now their tax credits, how many years later, are now being challenged by the teachers' unions. But almost anywhere they've been challenged, I mean, tax credits are essentially vouchers insofar that people get tax credits for contributing to these foundations that provide scholarships. So they are still scholarships. They give parents it's an innovative response basically to these Blaine amendments in state constitutions that prevent public monies flowing to private or religious schools. And so it was a very innovative response, in part from Florida and some other states, Arizona, to still provide this choice. And honestly, it doesn't really, the means really don't much matter. It's still providing parents with options.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, they've been very important at the state level. I'd like to see us look at some state policies, at some tax policies that could improve choice and opportunity at the federal level as well. The legislation that I've authored that would take Title I monies, that $14.5 billion, allow states to opt into a program where they could create scholarships with that. It would also expand Coverdale's and move past the $2,000 a year limit in Coverdale contributions and allow those Coverdales to be used for homeschool expenses. And then also look at taking 529 accounts, which already exist and parents can use to help pay for higher education, allow those dollars to be used for K through 12 education as well. Now, in this fiscal climate, all that costs money, and so those creates challenges in getting it done. But again, if we're going to be committed as a country to making sure that every child has a chance to go to a great school, we're going to have to look at those kinds of options, and they won't all be free.
You both provided very strong examples as to why private sector choice matters. We know the research moves in the right direction. 12 gold standard studies have shown that achievement has moved in the right direction. There's been one study to show neutral, but there have been no studies to show that the children involved have gone the other way. Let's move to the public school sector. Most of our children in the United States will remain in public schools for the foreseeable future. We have to make sure they work. What are recommendations that you have either from the legislative side or maybe even the creative side to make sure that students who remain there, and that should remain an option, that they get the kind of education they deserve?
I think from a federal policy perspective, some of the innovations that we've already talked about through the K-12 authorization it's important. We need to get away from this sort of top-down federal government control, everything from Common Core to the highly qualified teacher standards. I think those would be important innovations. I also believe that looking at the options that provide financial opportunities for parents to have choices are critical too. Some of this, though, is broader than that. It's broader than what kind of policy that we can pass in the federal government. And we've got to restore, I think, the respect within higher education. I mean, or within K through 12 education and higher education as well. We're starting to see now in Indiana a backlash. Our local colleges are producing far fewer teachers than they were even a few years ago as we go through this debate. And I think we all have a responsibility as leaders to bring accountability to the system, but also figure out how we're championing those champions of education in the classroom, because there's no future for education without great teachers.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's right. Part of that is just providing incentives to teachers in terms of performance pay or performance pay. I think this is gaining traction in places like Florida, Washington, D.C., and I think North Carolina has moved in that direction as well. Another thing is just on the state levels. I mean, the states can do a lot, and that's where really the opportunities lie. And a lot of the opportunities are just unwinding currently terrible policies like tenure, where teachers in California basically get lifetime security no matter what they do, how terrible they are, after 1.5 years of teaching, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is one of the things that one of the Vergara cases challenges. Another thing, and by the way, that in California, only 91 teachers have been dismissed, fired over a decade. There are hundreds of thousands, 91. That's, I think it was calculated, 0.002% of all teachers have been dismissed because of this, the extenuous due process, extra due process that are accorded teachers beyond anything that's available to other public sector workers. So just we're providing some kind of accountability there. I mean, I was very fortunate. I had mainly very good teachers. Then I had teachers I had a couple teachers who really some of them didn't even show up. I had a journalism teacher who just didn't show up a few times, and nothing could happen to him. And you do need to provide some accountability, because otherwise it's really demoralizing to the other teachers. You'll hear that from teachers who know like another teacher who's not doing their job, and nothing happens to them. They can not do their job, and they'll still get paid the same amount as everyone else. And I think that really, that it discourages good people from going into teaching, and really demoralizes the people who are currently in the profession.
Yeah, I'm just add there. I think accountability would actually improve morale. I mean, it may sound counterintuitive, but we've all been in organizations where, if there's no accountability, those that are performing well feel like, golly, why am I, rowing the boat for these folks who aren't doing the work? So I think we need to reward good performance, have accountability for those that aren't. The other thing I think from a federal government perspective, and I know it comes back to educational choice and options, we got to get the federal government out of the way. I mean, you heard Governor Bush say earlier that essentially federal funding is about 10% of our education funding in the country, and yet it's as much as 70 or 80% of the regulations that are foisted upon schools. I think the best way to devolve the Department of Education is to take that $30+ billion a year we're spending here in Washington and put that back in the hands of parents. And when you do that, thank you. When you do that, we'll have better outcomes for kids.
Charter schools are, some consider a compromise between traditional public schools and vouchers. Cities like New Orleans, majority of their students currently are in charter schools. DC, where I am, you see a large and burgeoning charter school market. What role do you see charter schools playing over the next 5 years in our broad conversation about achievement, closing the gap, and the idea of accountability?
Look, charter schools have been, it's crazy how successful some of the really top performing charter schools are in these areas like Chicago, New York, where you have the Harlem Success Academy, where I think almost 90% of the kids are rated proficient versus like 20 or 30% of kids in public schools. I think there was a Credo study that shows students in Boston at charter schools have make basically a year's worth of learning gains over their public school counterparts for every single year. So that's like learning twice as much. And I really think that is where the direction is going. I think it's a little more palatable to many Democrats, to be honest, because the money is still going to public schools. But these schools also have a lot more flexibility. They don't have to abide by the collective bargaining agreements for one or tenure, so they actually can do a lot more.
Great.
A million kids in America are waitlisted from their charter school. I think it's one of our great national embarrassments. I mean, no kid should have a wait list to their future. And we've got to do better to provide stronger opportunities for kids. I mentioned earlier that I was at the Basis School. Fascinating place. They had kids from every zip code in the District of Columbia in that one school, knocking it through the roof, performing very well with kids that, are in the broader public school system that had much worse results. I think one of the other innovations of the charter school program that's important is accountability. I mean, in Indiana, we have closed charter schools that weren't performing. I think it was Carly Fiorina that talked earlier about, with innovation comes risk, and you don't always get it right. I mean, I would challenge most folks in this room or any room to tell me the last time that a failing public school was closed for performance.
Sure.
I mean, it doesn't happen. I heard a few laughters in the room because it just doesn't happen. With charter schools, we do. I'd like to see us bring that charter school-like accountability to the broader public school system, and I think when we do, we'll have better results.
So we live in a very fast-paced technology society. Online education, blended learning is very popular. Some states have inculcated new policies in place to make sure that students are taking more classes online. You find many more adults doing the same thing. Do you think the online education movement has momentum, or do you think it will stop anytime soon? What do you think?
No, I think that there's a lot of potential to embrace technology and use technologies in schools. But at the same time, I think you have to be wary of these faddish efforts like the LAUSD, Los Angeles School District, who decided just let's go buy every kid an iPad and that will solve all of our problems. Just give every kid, and this ended up being a huge debacle because kids ended up hacking into them and so they could actually use them for personal, and then people lost them. It was of course this was going to happen. They didn't, it was a school district, and this is how they just don't plan these kinds of things. So I think you need to use technology wisely, targeted purposes. I think there's still, as I think Carly Fiorina mentioned, a special place for a teacher in a classroom that can help people because everyone learns different ways. Some people are visual learners, some people more tactile, some people oral, and I think teachers do have a role in helping that, but I think you could also utilize technology, and kids need to be exposed to different formats.
Yeah, I think technology is a big part of the future of education. Before the innovations of recent years, probably the last great technological breakthrough in education was the chalkboard 1,000+ years ago. And it's remarkable to see what can happen online. I don't think it's the answer for everybody, but both in rural settings where at times it gives you access to classes like physics or something else that you wouldn't otherwise be able to afford in a very rural school. Absolutely. In urban settings, it can make a big difference too. It can help supplement families that think homeschool is their best option for their kids. But again, I mean, I know I'm a bit of a broken record here, but the more we drive choice and opportunity into the system, if we had access to $300 billion plus of what we spend as a country, that's not just federal but state too. Sure. If the private market really had access to that kind of capital, you'd see broad innovations. I mean, I don't have my cell phone up here, but you know, we all have these small little iPhones. That's not what a car phone looked like 25 years ago, right? It looked like a big box, big bag. Why is that? Well, because of all the capital and dollars there, folks are working and innovating to have the next great idea, the next great mousetrap, because they know they're going to sell more phones if they have it. If we had that same kind of opportunity in education, I think we're just scratching the surface of what could be achieved with technology.
So we started the conversation at the federal level, we moved to the state, now let's go to the local level. At the American Enterprise Institute, we believe liberty matters, freedom matters, as well as the free market. One area that I particularly support with education is the concept of civil society, and that encompasses not only the government, but also nonprofit organizations and the faith community. So this is a two-part question. Number one, you've had a chance to run a nonprofit that worked in the choice area. When I was at Bayo, you were doing work at School Choice Indiana. What role do nonprofits play? They may have a state perspective, but they're ultimately focused on parents and families at the local level. What role do they play in civil society?
Well, a couple. I mean, one of the big things we were able to do once the programs were passed was to go out and work in the communities of interest and make sure that parents really understood what the true choices and options were. And I think it's also important to remember in this system of government we live in, it's not enough just to win the debate once. I mean, the forces of the status quo are relentless, and they keep coming back. And so once you have these innovations, you've got to continue to organize and help people understand what the true importance of the debate is, that if you want to continue to have this option for your child, you're going to have to continue. And then I think it's important to acknowledge, I mean, I do know some states have these amendments that say that, you know, no state dollars can go to religious schools, but you know, in America, the First Amendment says we all have, you know, a right to access to religious opportunities as well. And what I've seen in Indiana is that, again, parents who can afford to send their child to that kind of school are already doing it if they think that's their best choice. What are we going to do for those that can't afford it? And the Catholic private schools in Indiana, for example, have been a very big part of this renaissance of educational opportunities in the last 5 years. Absolutely.
The role of the nonprofits in this space.
Well, I think you see a lot of really, I mean, nonprofits run, first of all, contrary to what the teachers' unions will make it seem like, that these greedy for-profit institutions are trying to take over these charter schools and making money off of taxpayers. The truth is nonprofits run almost all of the charter schools. So that's one very significant role. And most of these nonprofits are, I mean, they're funded, obviously they bring in some money from the state for the per pupil grant, but they're also funded by investors. And, you know, in terms of New York, you have a lot of the hedge fund investors are providing very important opportunities for these poor kids. Another opportunity is Students First. Michelle Rhee, many people may be familiar with her, the former DC schools chancellor, who started this organization that really shines a spotlight on the states and provides a report card every year on grades the states, on their accountability measures, their laws, and how schools measure up. You also have, I think in California, the Students Matters, which is helping fund this lawsuit against the Gerard case and providing backing to these parents who are challenging these unfair laws. And I think those are just a few small ways, but nonprofits are really, I mean, they are the core, they are the basis, they are the grassroots providing for these changes.
And you have groups also like Hispanic Creole, Bayo, and others who are making sure this takes place at the local level. You know, let's talk about the faith-based community because they play a role in education. I read a great book by Nicole Fulgram. It's called All God's Children, and it focuses on the role of the faith community in public schools. But we also know that the faith community plays a role not only in public but also private. How can we better encourage the faith community across the line to be involved in school reform, whether it be public, private, or a combination thereof?
Well, I think you have the faith-based community, especially in these inner cities, and you'll see in Chicago, particularly in New York, where these are the worst areas of the cities, the worst education, they're violent areas, and this is where you have actually some liberal, democratic, preachers who go out to their community and try to, build up support. I mean, American Federation for Children is working with some of these preachers and these faith-based leaders to help build up support, public support in these communities, and put public pressure to bear on the lawmakers to provide more options in terms of lifting charter school caps, providing vouchers or tax credits, and they actually have a much bigger bully pulpit than I would say most anyone else does.
Yeah, I think it's a very important part of this debate going forward. In Indiana, I mentioned the Catholic schools. We have the Hastings Hebrew Academy as well. And historically, both the Jewish community and the Catholic community have had their own school systems, largely rooted in problems of discrimination and the fact that they felt like at a time in history that was important. We still have the legacy of those schools here now. So they have been some of the schools that have first tapped into these voucher opportunities. I think what you're going to see over time is an expansion of the kinds of schools like Floyd Flake has been doing in New York, for example, where you have large African-American churches or other large community churches who decide to establish their own school for some of the same reasons that these the historic Jewish or Catholic schools were started. And you know what? Those folks love their kids. Right. They love their kids. And if they start a school, they're going to make sure that those kids have great opportunities and that they leave those schools with the kind of education that will give them an opportunity to compete and succeed in life. And of course, there should be a certain measure of accountability to make sure that they actually are getting those kinds of outcomes. But what we've seen in Indiana is once you provide access and you make clear and then implement the program in a way where the long arm of the regulation of the state is not trying to turn them all into one public schools, because that's part of the point of choice, right? Is that if you have 50 color options and all those options are blue, well, that's not much of a choice, right? The real choice comes when you have a whole mosaic of opportunities, and I am convinced that that's where we're going to go with education in America.
So the American Federation of Children every year will put out an annual school choice yearbook. Provides you an opportunity of where the laws have grown in states, where we had amendments to laws. Great report. One thing that I've enjoyed about reading the report is it's a good tool for local superintendents, mayors, county commissioners, and others to say, how do we make education a strong part of our growth measure? Many people are moving to cities, particularly younger families are moving. Mayors are trying to actually attract business or to retain businesses in certain cities. And guess what? Education is going to make a big difference. If you had to, if you were the superintendent for a day, what pitch would you make for education and why it matters for a particular city and business?
Well, first of all, education is the solution to poverty. There have been so many studies that have shown that the only way students who are deprived of a good education, students who they'll drop out of school, that often happens. They have less of a chance of going to college. And the only way that they will escape poverty in many of these neighborhoods is education. And to gain the skills to compete for many of these jobs, they need education. This is why a lot of actually businesses are funding education in areas, or funding skills-based education in areas where there is none, and where the public schools don't provide this kind of training, this kind of vocational training that is needed. Education simply is the solution to a lot of our economic, obviously there are other issues, but a lot of our economic problems.
Yeah. I've lived this in my life. When I was a state legislator, my hometown was Shelbyville, Indiana. And when I was passing this legislation that dealt with graduation rates, Time magazine came into Shelbyville, Indiana, and we were a cover story and the cover story was Dropout Nation. And the reason they came to Shelbyville was in part because of my bill, but because Shelbyville was right at the national graduation rate average. It was 70% at the time. Our demographics essentially mirrored. So they used our community as a conversation of the broader debate publicly. I got a call from a business leader in my local community who said, Luke, what are you doing to us? We got Time magazine coming in here, going to highlight that our schools aren't good. And I said, well, listen, they've got an important story to tell, and I trust we're going to come together as a community. Well, Dave Adams is the superintendent of our local school system, and to his credit, he took this as an opportunity, and he has worked hard with the local business community. He's used the tools that we were able to put together in our legislation, and today Shelbyville's graduation rate is over 90%, measured correctly. And it's made a huge difference for business and opportunity. Again, though, I think the key there, right, is to have that measurable, which then drove reform.
So we discussed vouchers, charters, tax credits, traditional schools, online learning, blended learning. We talked about different mechanisms to deliver it. The one thing that I've heard everyone say across the board, including the three presidential candidates, parents. Yeah. Parents matter. A lot of local officials will say, guess what? We have parent night, we have a PTA night, parents won't show up. What can we do to truly empower parents to be involved in this movement?
Well, I think parents do matter. I think teachers' unions often actually try to fault parents for a lot of the problems that are in schools, saying, oh, parents they're not paying attention, they're just not involved enough, and that's why these students aren't learning. It's the parents' fault. It's not the parents' fault. There are systemic issues, and parents are interested in getting involved for the most part, and do want to help their kids learn. I think one of the information. I think parents need to have more information. They don't know what's going on at their schools, and again, the schools really don't have an incentive to tell the parents, hey, your kid, actually, he's not doing that well. He can't read, but we're going to pass him along to the 6th or 7th grade anyways, even though he can't read, because they don't want to admit that the schools are failing. But really, that is the most important thing, is to provide parents with the information about what's going on with their kids and how the schools are doing.
Excuse me 1 second. Would the owner of a BMW convertible with New Hampshire license plate I945611, I'll repeat, I945611, please move your car immediately or it will be towed. Transition to you.
That is an important message, so don't let me get in the way of that. We're just about to wrap up here, and I think information is important. Parents can't make choices if they don't really know what the difference is between schools. I think we also have to empower parents. Basically, if parents have the ability to move their child from one school to the next, if they don't feel like the current school's meeting their needs, I think you're going to see those kinds of active consumers much more engaged. But there's a whole lot of incredible work and innovators have been a part of this movement over the last 20 years. But the real drivers of these changes have been parents.
Absolutely.
The reason why we're seeing these changes is because parents are demanding them. And one of my favorite wisdoms in life is an old line from Woody Allen, at least that's who I heard it attributed to, where he said it takes 7 years to be an overnight success, right? Or we've all kind of heard the book that was popular a few years back, The Boiling Point, which talked about the fact that water looks the same until when it gets to the point of boiling. And we have an incredible opportunity right now. I mean, as somebody who's sort of been a student of politics for a while, back in the late 1970s, a guy named Jack Kemp was running around talking about innovative tax policies, and those policies became embraced by President Reagan, and it helped spur a couple decades of growth. I think right now we have an opportunity to lay the foundation to help people understand all the benefits that come with choice and opportunity. And 2017 could be the most important year in the history of education in this country if we do the work now.
Well, let me thank the 74 for putting this event together to have a real dialogue about education. Let me thank, in particular, the American Federation for Children, who have made it safe for us to have an honest dialogue about school choice. I want to thank both of you for your participation. And with the time we have, I'll ask you to give just a quick note. Both of you are well-accomplished people. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about students. You graduated Phi Beta Kappa. I talked to you about your Booth Award at Stanford. What advice do you have for high school students here and those across the country who are watching you right now?
High school students, well, enjoy life. Just don't focus too much on the, I mean, this is gonna sound terrible. Don't focus too much just about grades, and enjoy your time learning. To try various things, try various subjects, explore. I actually wasn't that, everything turned out well for me, but I'm saying that as in don't be too, you have plenty of time in life to be worried about the next move, the next step. Enjoy being in high school and just, you know, trying out different like activities.
Congressman?
You know, it's maybe hard in 30 seconds, so maybe give me a minute, but essentially when I talk to young people, I always tell them three things. Dream big, work a plan, and never quit. You know, one of the old cliches in America is somebody achieves something big, and they win a Super Bowl, they got an Oscar, they just get some big business award, and they come to the microphone and say, you know, I never dreamed this was possible. Well, either that person was exceedingly gracious, incredibly lucky, or they're just not telling you the truth, right? That the reality is to achieve big things, you got to dream big things. And then you got to work a specific plan to get there. There's an old ball coach in Indiana. He's a UCLA coach, but he got Hoosier roots. Johnny Wooden used to say, inch by inch, life's a cinch, yard by yard, life is hard. If you start working an individual plan, it's pretty amazing how quickly progress can come, and then you'll get some adversity, but you got to work through it. And with all that,
Let's thank our two speakers.
Thanks. And lunch is arriving, right?
And we don't want to stand in the middle of lunch.
Thanks.